The storm didn't announce itself. One moment the mountain was silent, the kind of silence that sits in your chest like a stone, and the next, the sky cracked open like something ancient had finally lost its patience. Kale Draven heard it from inside the lodge. The deep, structural groan of wind hitting the tree-line. The percussion of hail against the north-facing windows. He'd lived on the Ash Peak border for 6 years, and he knew the difference between a storm you weather and a storm you survive. This was the second kind. He pulled on his jacket without thinking about it. Old instinct. His wolf, the part of him that never fully slept, never fully quieted, had already gone alert. Standing at attention somewhere behind his sternum like a soldier who'd heard something the officers hadn't yet. There's something out there. He almost ignored it. Almost. He'd built this life around almost. Almost leaving the Eastern Coalition. Almost accepting the alpha seat his father left him. Almost letting himself believe that quiet was the same as peace. He opened the door into the mouth of the storm. The cold hit him like a fist. He shifted his weight into it, scanning the darkness beyond the lodge's outer light. Trees bent at angles that looked wrong. Snow drove sideways. And then, there, at the edge of the light, something moved. Not like wind moves. Like something trying not to be seen. Kale stepped off the porch. His wolf surged forward in his chest, pulling toward the shape in the dark with an urgency that made no sense. No rational sense. Because what was out there was a wolf, female, partially shifted, one leg dragging, and she was already going down. He reached her before his mind had made the decision to run. She collapsed against him with a weight that surprised him. Not physically, she was lean, underfed by the look of her partial shift stripping the fat from her frame. No, what surprised him was the density of her. Like holding something that had been compressed by tremendous pressure for a very long time. Her wolf form bled back as he caught her. Skin replacing fur. Human features reasserting themselves, though that was never quite the right word for what Lycan women looked like mid-shift. There was nothing fully human about the architecture of her face right now. Too sharp. Too old. He got her inside. He got the door closed against the storm. And then his wolf did something it hadn't done in years. It went completely, utterly still. Not the stillness of sleep. The stillness of recognition. Kale stood over the unconscious woman on his floor, breathing hard, and felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. It knows her. His wolf knew her. And that was impossible. Because Kale Draven had never seen this woman in his life. He didn't sleep. He cleaned the wound on her side, deep, from a blade rather than a claw, which told him something he wasn't sure he wanted to know, and he wrapped it with what he had, and he put her on the cot near the fire, and he sat in the chair across from her with a blade on his knee and his wolf lodged in his throat like something swallowed wrong. She was young. Or she looked young. With Lycans, that meant nothing. His grandmother had looked 35 years old at the time of her death. She'd been 112. This woman's face in stillness was, not beautiful, exactly. Or not only beautiful. It was the kind of face that looked like it had survived something. Bone structure that should have been elegant but had instead been carved lean by hardship. A jaw set even in sleep like she was bracing for impact. Dark hair matted with blood and storm water. Her hands were what held his attention longest. The knuckles. The calluses in specific places, sword grip, he recognized that. The faint silver scarring along the right forearm that came from prolonged exposure to silver-laced restraints. Someone had kept this woman chained. Who chains a rogue she-wolf? The more accurate question, the one Kale didn't want to ask himself yet, was, who chains her, and what were they afraid she'd do if they didn't? She woke at dawn with a blade in her hand. He didn't know where she'd gotten it. He'd checked her when he brought her in, he wasn't careless, but somehow, in the 6 hours she'd lain unconscious, she had sourced a weapon. His kitchen knife, he realized. She must have processed the room while appearing to be asleep. She was sitting up on the cot with the knife held loosely, pointed out, and her eyes were open and entirely, unsettlingly calm. "How long?" she said. Her voice was rough from either disuse or injury. Maybe both. 6 hours. She processed that. Her eyes moved around the room in a pattern he recognized, exits, threats, resources, in that order. Military sequencing. You're alone here. Yes. Packed territory. Borderland. Unclaimed. Something shifted in her face. Not relief, she didn't look like someone who permitted herself relief. More like a calculation resolved. I need to leave. Your wound will reopen. That's my concern. You'll be dead in the snow in 20 minutes. She looked at him then. Really looked at him, for the first time. And Cale felt the wolf in him respond to it, not with aggression, not with dominance posturing, but with something that felt bewilderingly like deference. He kept his face blank. You could have left me outside, she said. Yes. Why didn't you? Because my wolf recognized you. Because it still went in a way it hasn't in 6 years. Because something in me knew that whatever you are, you mattered. He said, the storm would have killed you. She studied him for 3 more seconds. Then she set the knife down on the cot beside her. Not giving it up, just making a different choice. I'll stay until the storm breaks, she said. Then I'm gone. Understood. I won't answer questions. I'll try to contain my devastating curiosity. Her eyes narrowed. Just slightly. Like she'd been prepared for many things and quiet sarcasm wasn't one of them. He almost smiled. Almost. She didn't offer her name. He didn't ask. He made food, practical, high-calorie, the kind of meal you make for someone who's been running, and she ate it with the focused efficiency of someone who'd learned not to take food for granted. She watched him while she ate. He watched the storm. The silence between them had texture. Wait. His wolf had settled into something he could only describe as waiting. Not the waiting of a predator. The waiting for something that had been searching for a long time and had just gotten a signal. It made him deeply, carefully uneasy. You're not going to ask, she said eventually. You said you wouldn't answer. Most people ask anyway. I'm not most people. She set her bowl down. The fire popped. Outside, the storm threw itself against the walls with operatic fury. Cale Draven, she said. Not a question. He went still. You know me. I know you. Eastern Coalition enforcer. Left 6 years ago under circumstances no one's been permitted to discuss. Took a border post that doesn't exist on any official territory map. She paused. You were very hard to find. The knife was back in her hand. He hadn't seen her pick it up. I wasn't looking to be found, he said carefully. And I'm starting to wonder if you're not as injured as you appeared last night. Oh, I'm injured. Something dark crossed her face. I just don't let it slow me down. Who sent you? No one sends me. Who are you running from? Everyone. She said it simply. Without drama. Like it was just a fact about her life she'd long since made peace with. Everyone is after me. That's simply the condition of my existence. And something about the way she said it, the exhaustion underneath the composure, cracked something open in his chest that he'd have preferred to keep sealed. You came here specifically, he said. To find me. To find the safest unclaimed territory on the northern border. You happened to be in it. And if I hadn't opened the door. A pause that went on a beat too long. I would have died in the snow, she said. And a great many people would have gotten exactly what they wanted. He found the mark at midday. She'd fallen back into sleep, real sleep, this time, the kind the body demands when it's been pushed past its limits, and he'd moved to add wood to the fire. He'd had to step close to the cot to reach the log stack. And that's when he saw it. On the back of her neck, partially obscured by her hair. A mark he recognized. His wolf recognized. A mark he'd seen exactly once in his life, in a history text kept under lock in the Eastern Coalition's restricted archive. The Lycan Royal Seal. Ancient. Pre-pack. Going back further than the current political structure, further than the 7-pack system, further than written Lycan history as most wolves understood it. The seal of the Lycan throne. His mind went quiet in a way that felt like the air before lightning. The last Lycan Queen died 20 years ago. Everyone knew this. The extinction of the royal bloodline was a historical fact. It was the reason the 7-pack system existed, the reason power had been redistributed, the reason men like his father had risen and men like Cale had grown up in the aftermath of that redistribution. The Lycan throne had died with Queen Mira Vaskin. Cale looked at the woman sleeping on his cot. At the royal seal on her neck. The silver scarring on her wrists from what he now understood had been very deliberate imprisonment. And he thought, what if it didn't? She woke to find him sitting across from her with his forearms on his knees and an expression on his face that she clearly read correctly, because she went very still. You saw it, she said. Yes. How much do you know? Enough to understand why everyone is after you. A beat. Not enough to understand how you're alive. She sat up slowly. The knife was in her hand again, but she wasn't pointing it at him. It seemed to be less a weapon, in these moments, and more a comfort object. Something to hold when the ground was unstable. My name is Saren, she said. That's all I'll give you. Saren Vaskin. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't use that name. Because it's dangerous. Because it belongs to someone who was supposed to be dead. The fire cracked. The storm had begun to ease, the worst of it passed, and in the quiet, her words settled into the room like something solid. Cale had spent 6 years building a life around not caring about pack politics. Around not caring about power structures, bloodlines, coalition maneuvering. He'd walked away from all of it with both hands and hadn't looked back. He cared now. God help him, he cares now. Tell me what happened, he said. Why? Because you came to border territory knowing it was mine. You know who I am and what I walked away from. If you wanted someone who didn't care about politics, if you wanted someone who had demonstrated no loyalty to any current power structure, then you didn't just stumble into my storm. The silence stretched. Then she said, the night my mother died. I was 8 years old. I was supposed to die with her. He didn't say anything. Let her continue at her own pace. The attack on the Vaskin seat wasn't a rogue uprising. It wasn't territorial aggression from a rival pack. It was a coordinated execution conducted by 4 of the 7 current Alpha Lords, men who had sat at my mother's table, who had sworn fealty to the Lycan throne, who had decided that a throne was less profitable than a vacuum. Something cold settled in Cale's chest. They killed the Queen, she continued. They killed the court. They killed every member of the royal bloodline they could find. I survived because my mother's head of security made a decision in the last 4 minutes of her life and got me out through a servant's passage. She paused. His name was Davin. He died 3 minutes after I cleared the passage. Bought me the time I needed with his life. Where did you go? Away. Far. Different names, different territories, the human world when I had to. 20 years of disappearing. Something shifted in her face. I got good at it. Then something changed. 6 months ago. She finally set the knife down. Not on the cot this time, on the floor. A different gesture, he thought. More deliberate. They found me. I don't know how. The network I'd built, it was compromised, or I was careless, or someone talked. I've spent 6 months running, and they are very well funded, very well organized, and very motivated. Because a living Lycan heir dismantles everything they built. 20 years of political architecture. The 7-pack system exists because the throne is empty. The Alpha Lords have power because no one has a better claim. Her eyes met his. Dark. Steady. Exhausted in a way that went all the way down. I have a better claim. Cale stood up. Paced to the window. Outside, the storm was retreating, pulling back toward the peaks, leaving the world scoured and white and still. He thought about his father. About the Eastern Coalition. About the meeting he'd walked in on 6 years ago, the one he wasn't supposed to witness, where 3 Alpha Lords had discussed the permanent elimination of a loose end. A loose end they described as the Vaskin remnant. He'd thought it was a metaphor. Political rhetoric. The paranoid contingency planning of men who'd built their power on sand and knew it. He turned back to face her. How many of the 7 are involved? 4 confirmed. 2 suspects. 1 is legitimate. She paused. Though I use that term loosely. Which one is legitimate? Alpha Cora of the Western Vale. She was a child when it happened. Inherited her seat from a grandfather who wasn't part of it. A fractional pause. She's the reason I'm still alive. She's been quietly routing resources to me for 3 years. She's the one who told me about you. Everything clicked. Cora sent you here. She said if I was ever truly cornered, if I was out of options and out of the road, there was one man on the northern border who had every reason to hate the Alpha Lords as much as I did. A look that wasn't quite a question. She was right, wasn't she? The meeting you walked out of. The reason you left the coalition. He said nothing. They were talking about me, she said quietly. Weren't they? It wasn't really a question. Yes, he said. They were. She told him the rest over the following hours, as the storm died and the cold settled into the kind of crystalline stillness that follows great upheaval. The network. How she'd built it, slowly, carefully, across years. Contacts in human cities, sympathetic wolves in minor packs too small to have political stake, a handful of former royal loyalists who'd survived the purge by being unremarkable enough not to target. Davin's daughter, who'd grown up knowing who Saren was and had spent her adult life feeding information upward. A historian in a neutral territory who'd spent 20 years quietly documenting the true account of the night the throne fell, documentation that, if it surfaced, would eviscerate the political legitimacy of 4 Alpha Lords simultaneously. Saren hadn't been running. That was what Kale understood, listening to her. She hadn't been running toward something, she'd been building something. Slowly, across 2 decades, from the inside of a disappearing act. Every territory she'd moved through, every identity she'd worn, every connection she'd quietly, carefully cultivated. You're not a refugee, he said. You're a campaign. Something that might, on another face, have been a smile. A very long-running one. The attack 6 months ago. The thing that blew your cover. Someone got close to the historian. His documentation was, the centerpiece. Without it, everything else is testimony from people with an obvious motive to lie. Was. He got it out before they reached him. 3 copies. Different locations. I know where one is. And the other 2. That's the problem. Kale felt the shape of it assembling in his mind. The tactical picture. She'd spent 20 years building an infrastructure designed to restore the Lycan throne, or more precisely, to expose and dismantle the fraudulent architecture that had replaced it. She'd been within reach of the mechanism that made it all viable, and then something had compromised it, and now she was here, bleeding, on the run, reduced to a single lead and a name given to her by the one Alpha Lord who wasn't complicit. You need the other 2 copies, he said. I need to know who's holding them. Davin's daughter was the courier. She got them out, split them between 3 people she trusted. She didn't tell me who, operational security. A beat that carried weight. She's been missing for 6 weeks. The cold in Kale's chest got sharper. Missing. I have to believe she's alive. Said in a tone that suggested she was not certain she could afford to believe it but was doing so anyway, with full awareness of the risk of hope. If she's alive, they're using her to find the copies. Which means the copies haven't been retrieved yet. Which means there's still time. To do what? She looked at him steadily. To finish what my mother started. To take back what was taken. To burn down 20 years of lies and replace them with a documented truth that cannot be denied or silenced. A pause. And to do it without starting a war that kills half the wolves on this continent in the process. That last part seems optimistic. That last part is the only part that matters. Her voice had shifted, not harder, exactly, but denser. Like something pressed to its essential core. I've spent 20 years learning what my mother didn't know. She trusted the Alpha Lords to choose loyalty over ambition. She believed in the system she'd built. She died for that belief. And you? I don't trust systems. I trust leverage. Her chin lifted just slightly. I'm going to give the 7 packs a choice. The truth, with a path back from it that doesn't require them to burn everything down. Or exposure, in every human and wolf court on the continent, with documentation that makes the last 20 years of Alpha Lord rule read as what it was, a coup conducted on the bodies of children. You're offering them the mercy of a graceful surrender. I'm offering them the mercy of a choice. Most people, given the option between a managed dismantling and a complete catastrophic collapse, will choose the managed dismantling. And the 4 who aren't most people. Her expression didn't change. But something in her eyes did. Something old. I have plans for them. Kale went outside as evening came. He stood in the aftermath of the storm, in the white silence of it, and he let himself feel the thing he'd been carefully not feeling since the moment he'd found the mark on her neck. His wolf wasn't just recognizing her. Wasn't just responding to her in the way wolves responded to authority or power. It was pulling toward her. Mate recognition was mythology to some wolves and biological certainty to others. He'd always occupied a careful middle position on the subject. Theoretical acknowledgement. Personal skepticism. Standing in the snow with the cold burning through his jacket and his wolf practically vibrating in his chest, he revisited that position. He thought about what it meant. The timing of it. The specific catastrophic inconvenience of it. She was the lost Lycan Queen. She had a 20-year campaign that was in its most critical and fragile phase. She had enemies that could field what amounted to armies. She had a mission that consumed her entirely and would continue to consume her until it was finished or she was dead. She was also, according to his wolf, his wolf was profoundly uninterested in the complications. Cale, who had built his entire adult life around the management of complications, was considerably more conflicted. He went back inside. She was standing at the window, watching the dark with the particular alertness of someone who'd learned to read danger in shadows. She'd found a clean shirt somewhere, one of his, several sizes too large, and her wound had stopped bleeding. Lycan healing, even compromised, was faster than human medicine. "You're not going to ask me to leave," she said, without turning. "No. You're going to help me." Not a question either. She'd read him during the conversation. She'd probably read him the moment she walked in, once she'd confirmed he was alone and non-hostile. "Yes," he said. "Because of what you heard in that meeting 6 years ago. That's part of it." She turned then. Looked at him with those steady, exhausted, ancient eyes. "What's the other part?" He considered the various honest answers available to him. Discarded most of them. Settled on the one that was true but also, at this juncture, strategically safe. Because if you're right about what's in that documentation, and I believe you are, then the political structure I spent a decade enforcing was built on mass murder. And I'd like to do something about that before I die. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then nodded, once. "All right," she said. "Then let me tell you what we need to do." She'd mapped it on the table. Using what was available, his topographic charts, a stick of charcoal, the retentive spatial memory of someone who'd spent 20 years navigating the continent under pressure. 3 locations. 3 people she needed to reach. First, Davin's daughter. Lyrian. Last known location, a minor pack settlement 4 territories east, but that was 6 weeks ago, before she'd gone missing. Saren's best intelligence suggested she'd been taken to one of the Eastern Coalition's holding facilities. She said holding facilities the way someone says a word they've rehearsed neutrality around. Cale knew about the holding facilities. He'd spent 6 years trying not to think about them. Second, a man named Osric. Former royal archivist. He'd survived the purge by being, in Saren's words, forgettably competent, skilled enough to be useful, unremarkable enough not to threaten. He'd spent 20 years embedded in the Coalition's own archive network, reading what they wrote about themselves with one hand and quietly copying the originals with the other. He had one of the 3 document copies. Third, a location rather than a person. A vault beneath the ruins of the old Vascan seat, a place no one went, because the official history described it as destroyed in the uprising. It wasn't destroyed. The upper levels were rubble. The vault below was untouched. "The 3rd copy is in the vault," Saren said. "Which is sitting inside Alpha Lord Dravach's territory." "Yes." Cale studied the map. Dravach was one of the 4. He led the operation. Flat. Factual. Whatever feeling lived beneath that fact, she had it under very tight management. He built his current seat less than a mile from my mother's ruins. As a statement. "And you want to walk into his territory?" "I want to retrieve documentation that proves he committed regicide and the coordinated murder of the royal bloodline." A fractional pause. "And yes. I intend to do it in his territory. In his backyard. In full view of a throne he thinks is permanently empty." Cale sat back. Looked at the map. Thought about the operational specifics, which were genuinely daunting, and tried very hard to do that thinking with the wolf recognition thing carefully set aside in a mental box. "Timeline," he said. "Lyrian first. If she's in coalition holding, she's the clock. We don't know how long she has or what they're willing to do to extract what she knows." Saren's voice had thinned slightly on that sentence. "Osric second. He'll be difficult but manageable. He's been waiting for contact. He just doesn't know it'll be me making it." Vault last. Last because it's the most dangerous. Last because by the time we get there, I want everything else already in motion. The moment we enter Dravach's territory, he'll know. The timing has to be right. Cale looked at her. At the controlled precision of how she'd laid this out. 20 years of planning made economical, stripped to its functional core. "You've rehearsed this," he said. "I've had nothing but time to rehearse this. There's something you haven't told me." She met his eyes without flinching. Several things. The most important one. A pause. Then, Alpha Cora isn't just a sympathizer. She's been positioned. Over the past 3 years, quietly, she has built alliances with the 2 Alpha Lords who are suspected but not confirmed. She has a coalition ready to move, to formally challenge the legitimacy of the 4, to call for a restoration vote, to support a Lycan heir's claim through the old accession protocols. She's been building the political mechanism while you built the evidentiary one. If I deliver the documentation, she can move within 48 hours. The 4 Alpha Lords will face a unified challenge from the other 3, backed by a living heir and 20 years of documented crimes. Something moved across her face. It won't be bloodless. But it can be contained. It can be, not a war. A reckoning. Kale understood the shape of it now. Fully. And if you fail, he said. If I fail, Cora never moves. She can't, without the documentation, she has no protection. She'd be exposed and removed inside a week. The exhaustion surfaced, briefly, through the composure. If I fail, it ends here. There's no one else. There's no other version of this. It's been 20 years and I am the last piece of it, and if I fail. You won't, he said. She stopped. I looked at him. That's not a plan, she said. That's sentiment. No, he said. It's an assessment. You've been running this for 20 years. You built a network from nothing, survived a continent-wide manhunt, and arrived here, bleeding, hunted, compromised, with the map still in your head and the next 3 moves already sequenced. He held her gaze. You won't fail. And I'm going to help make sure of it. Something shifted in her face. She didn't cry. He suspected she hadn't let herself cry in a very long time. But something beneath the surface moved, slightly, like a fault line registering a tremor. We leave at first light. It took them 6 days to reach the Coalition's eastern holding facility. 6 days of moving through forest and fringe territory, avoiding main roads and pack-monitored routes. 6 days of learning each other in the specific, efficient way that people learn each other when survival is the curriculum. He learned, she slept lightly, always, with her back to a wall. She ate quickly, without pleasure, the way eating had become purely functional. She could go 36 hours without sleep before her judgment showed any degradation, and even then the degradation was subtle. She simply became slightly less patient with irrelevant variables. She was not, he discovered, without humor. It was dry, understated, deployed rarely and with precision. She used it like a blade she kept for close quarters. She learned, he cooked well, which seemed to genuinely surprise her. He navigated by landmarks rather than maps, which he found initially frustrating and then strategically useful. He didn't feel silence. She'd been surrounded, for years, by people who filled silence, either with chatter or with the performative purposefulness of people managing her. His stillness didn't feel like emptiness. She didn't say that. But he could tell she'd registered it. The wolf recognition sat between them like a fire they were both carefully not looking at. He didn't say anything about it. He suspected she'd noticed something. Wolves could sense these things, even if they didn't always name them, but she didn't raise it, and he followed her lead. There was enough to navigate without adding that. The holding facility was underground. That was standard coalition practice, infrastructure that didn't exist on any mapping, that could be denied, that left no architectural evidence. Kale knew about it because he'd spent 6 years trying to outrun what he knew. He walked back toward it with a Lycan Queen at his shoulder. The irony was not lost on him. The facility had 3 layers of guard rotation. He knew the pattern, it hadn't changed, which was coalition arrogance or coalition laziness, possibly both. He and Saren moved through the first and second layers in a silence so complete it was almost choreographed. She moved like someone who'd done infiltration work before. She moved, he thought, like someone who'd had nothing but time to become very good at things that shouldn't have been necessary. The third layer was the problem. For guards, tighter rotation, silver-laced infrastructure designed to suppress Lycan capability. Saren went still when they hit the silver zone, a specific, focused stillness, the body managing pain it wasn't showing. He looked at her. She shook her head minutely. I'm fine. Keep moving. He didn't argue. He also positioned himself slightly ahead of her through that section, without making it obvious, putting his body between her and the worst of the silver-laced wall panels. She noticed. She didn't comment. They found Lyrian in the third cell. She was alive. Bruised, exhausted, dehydrated, but alive, and the expression on her face when she saw Saren was the most complicated thing Kale had witnessed in years. Relief and grief and ferocity all compacted into a single look. "You actually came," Lyrian said. "I told you I would," Saren said. "If it ever came to it. You told me that 12 years ago. I have good follow-through." Lyrian laughed, a broken, real sound. Then she grabbed Saren's wrist with both hands. "The copies. The second one, I put it with a woman named Thessaly. She runs a courier business out of the Ashfield border market. She's human, she doesn't know what it is. She thinks it's a private legal document. She's safe. She has no idea what she's holding. She's completely safe." A pause. "They don't know about her. They kept asking about Osric. They think he has both remaining copies. He only has one." "I know. I didn't tell them about Thessaly." Lyrian's jaw set. "They were very persuasive about trying to get me to." The weight of that sentence landed. Saren held Lyrian's gaze for a moment with something in her expression that Kale couldn't fully read. Love, probably, in the specific form it took in someone who'd learned to carry it at careful distance. Then she said, "We're leaving. Right now. Can you move?" "I've been ready to move since they put me in here." The archivist was small, elderly, and, upon opening the door at midnight to find a woman he'd believed dead for 20 years standing on his doorstep, impressively composed. He looked at Saren for a long time. Then he said, "You have your mother's jaw. I always hoped that meant you'd inherited her stubbornness. Did you get the documentation out?" Saren asked. Before the door was fully open. "Yes." He stepped back to let them in. "Come. I've been waiting for this conversation for 2 decades. The documentation was meticulous." That was the word Kale kept returning to as Osric spread it across his kitchen table, meticulous. 20 years of archival work. Original correspondence between the 4 Alpha Lords, predating the night of the Purge, planning the operation with the specificity of men who were very certain they would never be held accountable for it. Records of the financial arrangements made afterward. Lists of witnesses silenced. A census of royal household members killed, cross-referenced with official coalition records that listed entirely different causes of death. Saren stood over it. Her hands flat on the table. Her face was very still. Kale watched her look at the evidence of the worst night of her life, rendered in paper and ink and 20 years of careful documentation. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "This is enough. Combined with the other 2 copies, it's more than enough," Osric said. "It's irrefutable." "We go to the vault," Saren said. "We retrieve the 3rd copy. And then we send everything to Cora simultaneously. All 3 copies. Different routes. So that even if someone moves to intercept, at least one gets through," Kale finished. "Cora needs all 3 for maximum impact. But even one is a fire they can't put out," Lyrian said, from where she was sitting in the corner, wrapped in a blanket Osric had produced, eating with the same focused efficiency as Saren. Saren looked at Kale. He nodded. "The vault," he said. "Let's finish it." They moved into Travach's territory on a moonless night. All 4 of them now. Kale had argued for leaving Osric and Lyrian at a safe remove, and Saren had acknowledged the logic and overruled it. If I don't come back from the vault, they need to be positioned to move anyway. Together is safer. He'd recognized it as tactically sound. He'd also recognized it as the decision of someone who was genuinely uncertain whether she'd survive what came next and was arranging the board accordingly. Travach's territory was the oldest pack land on the continent. Pre-coalition, pre-7-pack system, older than living memory. The land itself felt heavy with it, a density in the air, a weight underfoot, like the ground remembered what had happened on it. The ruins of the Vascan seat rose against the night sky. What remained was skeletal, 3 outer walls, the remnant of a tower, rubble where the main structure had collapsed or been collapsed. Beside it, visible through the tree line, the lights of Travach's new seat. Built deliberately close. Built to be a statement. Saren stood at the edge of the ruins and looked at what was left of the place where she'd been born. Kale stood slightly behind her and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. "I came here once before," she said eventually. 12 years ago. I needed to see it." A pause. "I thought it would feel different. I thought I'd feel something big." She was quiet for a moment. "I felt very small. Like the ruins were larger than my grief for them. And now. She turned away from the ruins. Turned toward the entrance to the vault, concealed under decades of overgrowth, invisible unless you knew it was there. Now I feel useful, she said. Which is better? The vault was intact. More than intact, it was preserved, sealed, precisely as it had been left. The air inside was cold and close and smelled of old stone and older dust. Saren moved through it without hesitation, by memory, navigating rooms she hadn't seen in 20 years as if the map of them was written into her. She stopped at a panel in the far wall. Set her hand against it. The mechanism responded to her, blood lock, royal bloodline, 20 years of dormancy dissolving instantly under her touch, and opened. The case inside was small. Simple. Designed to be unremarkable. She took it out. Hold it. Her hands were absolutely steady. That's everything, she said. And then they heard it. The sound of many wolves entering the ruins from every direction at once. Dravach had followed them. Not closely enough to intercept, or perhaps he'd chosen not to intercept, which was a different and more alarming reading of the situation. He stood at the entrance of the vault with 12 wolves at his back and an expression of composed contempt on his face. He was older than Kale had expected. Heavier, thicker through the chest, his hair gone to iron. He had the look of a man who'd spent 2 decades being unchallenged and had settled comfortably into his own certainty. He looked at Saren. The Vascan remnant, he said. I was told you were dead. Frequently, Saren said. I see you found what you were looking for. He nodded toward the case in her hands. It won't matter. The documentation has been in that vault for 20 years, another hour won't change what it is. And I have 12 wolves to your 4. You have 12 wolves, Saren agreed. I have a dead woman's evidence, 3 copies already in transit, and the formal backing of Alpha Cora of the Western Vale. Something moved through Dravach's expression. The first crack in the certainty. Cora wouldn't. She already has. Saren's voice was quiet. Absolute. The moment we entered your territory, a signal went out. The copies held by my contacts were dispatched. By morning, Alpha Cora will have received documentation of the crimes you committed 20 years ago, and she will have activated the challenge protocol with the support of 2 additional Alpha Lords who are deeply uncomfortable with the company they've been keeping. You're bluffing. I've had 20 years to prepare for this moment. Ask yourself, do I strike you as someone who bluffs? The silence that followed had its own pressure. Kale watched Dravach process it, watched the men do the calculation, run the scenarios, measure what he was looking at. Looking at a woman who had survived everything he'd sent after her, built an infrastructure around the ruins of a life he'd destroyed, and walked into his territory to take back the last thing he'd failed to burn. I could kill you right now, Dravach said. Yes, Saren said. You could. She said it without flinching. Without softening it. You're not afraid, Dravach said, and for the first time something other than contempt entered his voice. Something that was almost reluctant respect. I've been afraid for 20 years, she said. I just stopped letting it make my decisions. She took one step forward. The documentation goes out regardless. The challenge stands regardless. Everything I've built stands regardless, because I built it to stand without me. Another step. But if you kill me right now, you trade a managed reckoning for a war. Because I am not the only one who knows what's in those files, and there are people who've been waiting for permission to use that knowledge, and my death is the permission they've been waiting for. Dravach was very still. So here is what I'm offering you, Saren said. Surrender your seat. Step back from the coalition before the challenge formally convenes. Support the accession process peacefully. A beat. And I will ensure that what happens to you is adjudicated by law rather than by the wolves who've been waiting 20 years for the chance to do something considerably less structured. You'd offer mercy to the men who killed your mother. I'm not offering mercy, she said. I'm offering him a choice my mother never got. The silence was total. Kale stood very still. His wolf was coiled, ready, watching Dravach's 12 wolves with the calm focus of something that had done this before. But his attention was on Saren. On the woman standing in the ruins of her childhood home, in the vault of a murdered queen, offering the men responsible the kind of choice that required more strength than violence. Dravach looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he looked at his wolves. Then he stepped aside. The accession process, he said. His voice had gone flat. Stripped of contempt. You'll hold to what you said. I'll hold to what I said. He walked out of the vault without looking back. His wolves followed. And Saren stood in the echoing silence of the vault and breathed. The formal challenge convened 11 days later. Cale watched it from the third row of a great hall he'd never expected to enter, in a coalition seat he'd walked out of 6 years ago, surrounded by wolves who were still processing the seismic shift of the past week and a half. Saren stood at the center of it. Wearing her name for the first time in 20 years. Wearing it the way she wore everything, not performing it, not performing anything. Just being it, directly and completely, with the specific authority of someone who had earned what they were claiming through something considerably more demanding than inheritance. She didn't ask them to accept her. She laid the evidence before them. She made the case. She outlined the path forward, not a return to the old structure. She was clear about that, because the old structure had vulnerabilities she intended to address, but a restoration of legitimate authority, with new checks on it, new accountability built in, new protocols that made it significantly harder for a room full of ambitious men to quietly murder a queen and call it a power transfer. Cora presented the counter-challenge from the 3 non-complicit Alpha Lords. 2 of the 4 complicit ones had already stepped back, following Dravach's lead. The remaining 2 spent the first day of proceedings attempting resistance and the second day negotiating terms, which meant the outcome was never really in doubt, but Saren let the process run its full course anyway, because the process mattered. The legitimacy of it mattered. It took 6 days. On the 7th day, the accession vote was formal and unanimous. Cale found her afterward in an anteroom off the main hall. She was sitting on a bench with her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands, not crying, just breathing, just existing for a moment without the weight of everything she'd been carrying being in active motion. He sat down beside her. They sat in silence for a while. Lyrian is going to need a title, Saren said finally. She spent 20 years in service to a crown she never formally belonged to. She'll hate the title. Completely irrelevant. She's getting one. Cale was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens now? 6 months of transition. Probably longer. There are structures to dismantle and rebuild. People to account for and people to protect. I have a political system that's spent 20 years calculating around a corrupt center and needs to be, carefully, restructured from the inside. A pause. It will not be simple. It will not be fast. And it will not be done. No. I've spent 20 years learning how to survive. I need to learn how to build. She lifted her head. I looked at him. The exhaustion was still there, it would probably always be there, baked into her at some structural level, but underneath it, something else. Something that might have been, tentatively, the early architecture of something that wasn't survival. I could use help with that. Cale looked back at her. His wolf was still. The particular stillness of something that had arrived. All right, he said. Just like that. You laid out a very compelling operational case. The almost smile. Dry. Precise. Real. Subscribe, she said. Drop your comments. Like. Share. He blinked at her. On. Lyrian said I should practice being personable, she said, with complete deadpan dignity. Cale looked at the Lycan Queen of the restored throne, the woman who'd spent 20 years running and building and surviving, who'd walked into the worst night of her life's ruins and walked out with the evidence to dismantle 2 decades of her pill I'll go afraid, who'd offered mercy where she had every right to offer nothing, and he laughed. She watched him laugh with an expression of profound composure that was only betrayed by the very slight curve at the corner of her mouth. Outside the anteroom, the accession council was reconvening. The work was beginning. 20 years of careful construction had reached its moment of execution, and there was no such thing as finished, only forward. But in here, in this small room, in this brief pause between what had been survived and what would have to be built, a queen and a man who had stopped running sat together and were, for a moment, simply still. If this story kept you here, prove it. Subscribe right now. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs a story like this. And drop a comment below, tell me which moment got you. I read every single one. You have no idea how much one person can change this channel's entire future.